You're listening to The Main Event with Zach Gelb and Chase Sr. on WHIP.
Big Five matchup tonight at Hagan Arena. It's going to be the Owls and the Hawks, Temple and St. Joe's. Tip-off is at 6:30. You can listen to that game right here on Philly's #1 college radio station, WHIP via iHeartRadio. Now joining us on the hotline is Mr. Bracketologist himself from ESPN, also the color analyst for St. Joe's basketball on the radio, and that's Joe Lunardi. Joe, Zach, and Chase here at Temple's campus. Thanks for a few minutes. How are you?
Hey, guys. Happy Wednesday.
Well, yes, it's a happy Wednesday, and it's a Big Five Wednesday, and we appreciate you giving us a few minutes. Nothing like it when the Hawks and the Owls meet up for a Big Five game early on in the season. You covered a lot of basketball in your lifetime. You're a St. Joe's guy. Give me your favorite Big Five memory looking back at the Big Five rivalry for you.
Wow, that's a great one. I would have to say my most foundational Big Five memory. I was a sophomore at St. Joe's. It was 1980. You guys, probably weren't born.
I wasn't even a thought yet.
Not at all.
Which is irritating in and of itself to me. But in those days, winning the Big Five, and I know people get tired of hearing this kind of talk sometimes, but winning the Big Five title was what the local teams most aspired to do. It wasn't about reaching the NCAA tournament. Most of the locals didn't give as much attention to their league games as they do now. I'm not saying it was better then. It was just different. So in that particular season, the last night of the regular season schedule came down to St. Joe's Villanova at the Palestra. Both were 3-0 in the Big Five. So you can imagine the scene, and it was in those, the building was split in half, as had been, going all the way back to the 50s. And, Villanova was ranked. St. Joe's was not. So the template was perfectly in place. St. Joe's hits a buzzer beater and wins by a point and wins the Big Five title, storm the court, and all that. And, that was the game that everybody remembered that year, even though St. Joe's and Temple would meet in the ECC championship game, like 2 weeks later. Temple would win by a point and go to the tournament, and yet everybody remembers the Big Five game that year more than the game that sent a team to the tournament. So that just may be a little history lesson in how things have evolved since back before you guys were a thought.
How about that? And Joe, real quick, because I'm sure that we could talk about this for a long time. The Big Five games right now are special. It's an intense rivalry anytime any of these teams meet up. But it's not as much of a point of emphasis now on the schedule as it was back in the day. What do you think about that?
I think it's just the natural change of the sport.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like it or not, the greatest amount of interest in our sport is in March because of the tournament. And teams and programs and coaches and leagues are judged by that, rightly or wrongly. And it would be probably hypocritical of me to moan about that because I've probably had 0.1% of something to do with that. So, but I will say what's weird about tonight, at least to me, I'm still not mentally over this whole Temple not in the Atlantic 10 thing, because I go to do my prep and I'm writing in all these A10 stats and A10 comparisons of these two teams, and I guess it's about time now, second year in, that I get over that vis-a-vis the Owls.
Yeah, well, it's a little bit odd for us as well, as the American Athletic Conference is such, for geographically, there's so many wide areas that they could play in. One day they could be playing in Texas, then coming back up on the East Coast, then going out to the West Coast. So it's still very interesting as we're spending a few minutes with Joe Lunardi. Just getting real quickly back to the Big Five. Final one on this one before we get into the X's and O's of tonight's game between St. Joe's and Temple. Do you believe that they should play a little bit more games at the Palestra? I know Temple plays LaSalle this Saturday at the Palestra, but do you think that could bring the rivalry a little bit more back like what it was when you were going to school if they played more games at the Palestra?
I think if somebody would wave a magic wand and say that all the City Series games have to be there and that the schools didn't have a vote, that would be wonderful. And, a lot of things from 30 and 40 and 50 years ago, if they would happen again, would be wonderful. But that's just not the way life works, and, I'm over it.
All right, let's get to tonight's game. We had Martelli on Monday, and he was talking about how DeAndre Bembry really needs some help because he's leading St. Joe's in almost every statistical category. When you take a look at the stat sheet, he's a hell of a player, had a really good, solid freshman year last year. They lose the big three. St. Joe's lose their big three seniors. What does Bembry need help from his other guys? Who are some guys that could step up that could help out Bembry and complement him on the court?
I guess this was the fear for the Hawks coming into the season, right, that they would be a one-man band, at least in the early portion of the season, until other guys got comfortable in their roles. What's not clear to me, having watched 6 games, is are those guys really here, and is their ability level such that there is going to be help? I mean, when you look at the shooting numbers, not just of St. Joe's, but of Temple also, we're looking at some epically bad national rankings, not just in terms of three-point shooting, but shooting inside the arc. So, I mean, these guys are bricklayers of all stripes, both teams, with the only significant difference being that the Hawks also extend that awful shooting to the foul line, whereas Temple is at least average in terms of its national ranking, and I think 69.2%. The Hawks are in the 60-point-something range. So what does DeAndre Bembry need? He needs somebody else on his team to make a basket a little bit more often. And I don't think it's more complicated than that.
Joe Lunardi of ESPN joins us right now. Main event with Zach Gelb and Chase Sr. here on WHIP Radio in Philadelphia. Joe, a guy who stepped his game up from last year is Javon Bowman. He's given St. Joe's a little bit more of a presence inside, and he's already played more minutes this year than he did all of last season. What do you think of his upside?
I think Javon has been a pleasant surprise. His footwork and his hands at the offensive end, I think, will surprise. Where I think he's not maybe meeting expectations is right now he's only getting the rebounds that come to him. Mm-hmm. He's not getting the ones where size and strength and positioning, would be fought for, and maybe a more experienced guy would know better how to use his size. So I'd be watching that tonight. And he's really, really not very confident at the foul line. Not that he's been getting fouled a lot, but you would think over time, as the Hawks get better at feeding the post, that he'll get fouled more. And right now he's a liability there. But I would say the cup is more full than empty with Bauman at this point in what's still a very young career.
A year ago, Temple suffered the most losses in program history with 22 L's. And this season, I know it's so early, Joe, but they sit at 4-2. Had they exceeded your expectations so far here in the early going?
I would say they're right about on point. I never really expected, the bad times to continue for more than a year for Temple. And in fairness, I didn't think they would dip quite as far as they did. But there were a lot of mitigating circumstances last year, injuries chief among them. And, every once in a while, you reach a point where you have to turn the roster over. And that's what Fran Dunphy is trying to do. I mean, he's been to the tournament, 5 or 6 straight years in a row. You can expect that at Duke and Kentucky and Michigan State and the like. But it really doesn't happen that way in most places in college basketball. And I think they're back on the right track in terms of both who they have this year, who's coming later this year, and more importantly, who's coming down the road, that they'll be back to having an NCAA tournament nucleus maybe as soon as next season. And this is a good bridge year to that.
I really do believe that we'll see what this Temple team is made of after Game 10 because they'll get more help on the offensive side of the ball with Devin Coleman finally being eligible and then Jesse Morgan as well, both those guys being transfers from UMass and Clemson. But one guy that was a transfer from Texas that's playing on the court now, and his season got off to a little bit of a slow start with the ankle injury, was Jalen Bond. But Bond really showed in the LIU-Brooklyn game what he's capable of, pulling in that double-double and being an offensive rebounder and extending possessions. What does St. Joe's need to do tonight to contain Jalen Bond, both offensively and defensively?
I think it's a really interesting matchup because at times we're going to see him out there with Aaron Brown, a St. Joseph's transfer, who a very similar situation. You know, both of those guys were District 1 standouts. They played against each other in state championship games at Plymouth White Marsh and Penwood. Then they both went away to Big 12 schools, Texas and West Virginia. And, you know, the grass isn't always greener, and now they're back. And Aaron Brown, I would say, has shown less rust than Jalen and been a more consistent performer through his 6 games. You know, Bond is coming off the better, you know, game last time out. But, you know, they're not dissimilar players, and I think both will ultimately be, you know, 10-point, 8-rebound, the game kind of guys when all is said and done.
You take a look at this St. Joe's team. They've been up and down so far through the start of this young season, and a lot of it's come down to the final 2 minutes. They open up the night with an opening night 1-point loss. Then they bounce back with a 3-point win over Drexel. You play a close game that goes into overtime against LIU Brooklyn. You pull it out, and then on Thanksgiving, you guys went down to Western Kentucky. As we're spending a few minutes with Joe Lunardi. You could hear him as a color analyst for St. Joe's Hoops, as well as the ESPN bracketologist. How does Martelli improve this team closing out at the end of the games? Because this is a Big 5 matchup tonight, and I expect it to come down to the wire at Hagan Arena.
I do too. I don't see either team pulling away from the other one, simply because neither of them's good enough to score enough, at least at this stage of their development, you know, to ring up an 80 to 60 kind of game. Like, that's just not going to happen. These teams would have to play 3 halves to score that many points. And I don't think any of us, you know, want to stay that late tonight, particularly with Duke, Wisconsin on at 9:30. Just a little programming note. And, you know, I would say if I'm the Hawks, the best way to be better at the end of the game is probably to start making foul shots. I mean, you know, 5 for 16 or whatever it was against Western Kentucky, you're not going to win a one-possession game that way. Like, all the coaching in the world isn't going to change. You know, if this was 5th and 6th grade girls CYO basketball, you know, which I coached way back in the day, you know, if it's 48-47 with 2 minutes to go and you're missing one-and-ones, you're going to lose. So I would look for that and, you know, taking care of the basketball. Which of the experienced point guards, Cummings or Chris Wilson, is going to do a better job in that situation? I think Cummings is a little bit better of a player, but, you know, the Hawks, and because of him, I would give Temple the matchup and the edge in the game if it were on neutral court. But the fact that it's at Hagan Arena, I think makes this a coin flip.
Joe, DeAndre Bembry was fantastic last year. One of the better players in the Atlantic 10, the top freshman in that conference. This year, in his last few games, he's averaging over 20 points. In the long run, how high of a ceiling does he have?
I don't think he's going to have to worry about having a traditional resume ready at the end of senior year.
Mm-hmm.
I think he will be playing professional basketball somewhere, and you know, certainly I don't think the NBA is out of the question. He has some NBA-level skills now, but his handle would have to get a little better, and, you know, certainly a more consistent shooting stroke. But you can say that about a lot of guys, including some of which are in the NBA right now. But he's certainly as high a level talent that the Hawks have had in their program in a long, long time, for as young as he still is.
Joe Lunardi, before we let you run, I have to ask you one quick question. I think it's an automatic lock that Kentucky's going to be the #1 overall seed, unless if they just stop playing basketball in Kentucky. How do you beat Kentucky? Is it just going to have to take a team to be really hot from 3 one night to get a W against them?
I wouldn't go that far. I don't think they're a guaranteed #1 overall seed.
Interesting.
Because we forget all the things that happen in conference play when teams start to go on the road. You know, they haven't played a true road game yet. And even the best teams, the very best teams of the last 10 or 20 years, and I'm talking about the Christian Laettner Duke teams or the UNLV teams or, you know, Carolina under Roy Williams in 05. Like, those teams generally lose a game or two in their league on the road just because. And, you know, this Kentucky team was in a game at home against Buffalo at halftime and against Boston U at halftime because they're still 18 and 19-year-old kids whose behavior is unpredictable, not just at basketball, but at life. I mean, think about how you were at 18 or 19. Now, I'm too old to remember that, my own case, but yes, they're the prohibitive favorite. But how often in college basketball does the prohibitive favorite win at the end? Not as often as you would think.
Good point. Joe, it was a lot of fun today. We'll see you tonight. Should be a great game at Hagan Arena between St. Joe's and Temple. We appreciate a few minutes. We'll see you tonight.
Listen, if you guys are sitting under the basket with the way these teams shoot, bring a helmet.
All right, we'll do so. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.
See ya.
All right, there's Joe Lunardi. Very funny by Joe Lunardi.
That's hilarious.
He needs to bring a helmet.
Well, hey, we mentioned in the open that Temple has struggled mightily from shooting from the outside, and Joe in his preparation found that out. And St. Joe's has been a horrible free throw shooting team so far this season. It should be ugly.
Will be a fun one. I think it's coming down to a last second possession kind of game.
It'll be
as
close.
Always they do in the Big Five. So,
yeah.
All right, time in the studio is 11:33 right now. Zach Gelb and Chase Sr. here with you for WHIP Radio via iHeartRadio. We'll take a quick break, and when we get back, we got to flip the page, do some Temple football talk. We don't necessarily have to wear helmets when we broadcast a Temple football game because there's no way P.J. Walker's throwing the ball up at the broadcasting booth. That's not happening.
He's got the arm strength.
Yes, but they got to find a way
accuracy
to score some touchdowns. Zach Gelb, Chase Sr. here with you. We'll be back after this.